Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Nicaragua webinar entitled Our Time in Nicaragua, Veterans for Peace Report Back. My name is Barbara Larkham, and I'm one of your co-moderators today. We'll hear from our featured speakers in a few minutes, but first I'm very pleased to welcome the other co-moderator, Camilo Mejía, a Nicaraguan citizen, U.S. military veteran, and former prisoner of conscience. Welcome, Camilo.
Thank you, Barbara. Hello, everyone. As Barbara said, my name is Camilo Mejía, Nicaraguan born, based in the U.S., U.S. veterans, former an Iraq War veteran and resister, and I have been a member of Veterans for Peace since I made the decision to refuse to go back to the illegal and immoral U.S. war on the people of Iraq. That was already 20 years ago when I became a member of Veterans for Peace. I am forever grateful to my brothers and sisters in Veterans for Peace for their continued support of Nicaragua and other peoples who find themselves in similar situations to the situation of Nicaragua. We want to thank you. We want to thank Yoav Elinevsky for providing technical support today. We also thank our many organizational sponsors and co-sponsors who will be listed in the chat. You'll see several buttons available at the bottom of your screen. One button is for closed captions. Just click it to turn it on. Also, feel free to use the chat function to offer comments throughout this event. But to keep it working in service for the webinar, we ask you to use it in the respectful ways and that you don't distract from the program. The meaning comments about an attendee, speaker, or moderator will not be tolerated. Today's chat monitor is Arnold Matlin, and please direct messages to him directly if you have any concerns about comments in the chat. Also, if you have a question for the speakers, please don't put your question in the chat or we may not see it. Instead, use the click the Q&A button and place your question there. We'll select your questions from the Q&A to post to our speakers. The webinar is part of a monthly series about Nicaragua. Please mark your calendars for Sunday, July 27 for the next webinar featuring two other delegations to Nicaragua who are learning about the healthcare system and the history of the Sandinista Revolution. Yeah, over to Barbara.
This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be sent to all registrants within the next few days. When it's ready, it will also be posted on the website of the Nicaragua Solidarity Coalition, nicasolidarity.com, and also on its YouTube channel. And I believe it will also be on the Activist News Network channel. Okay, if you would like to become more active in supporting Nicaragua's sovereignty and opposing foreign interference there, please join the International Nicaragua Solidarity Coalition. You can check their website regularly for updates and new resources at nicasolidarity.com. You can also subscribe to the newsletter, monthly meetings, action alerts, and other notices from the Nicaragua Solidarity Coalition by going to bit.ly/NICA-subs. That's bit.ly/N NICA S subs. The next general meeting is on Monday, July 14th. The coalition meets on the second Monday of each month at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And now we have a special announcement. In response to last night's bombing of Iran by the United States, the Coordinating Committee of Nicaragua Solidarity Coalition has voted to endorse the March on Washington on Saturday, June 28th, called by many organizations in the global resistance for peace and justice, in order to protest the U.S. war on Iran. Please ask your group also to endorse the protest. The link for endorsement will be posted in the chat. You can also organize your own local action anywhere, and post a notice about it at the website of UNAC, that's the United National Anti-War Coalition. Over
We're
to you,
also-
Camilo.
Thank you, Barbara. We're also putting other links in the chat to subscribe to the NicaNet email list and Nica Notes, and to download ebooks about Nicaragua. And now we turn to today's program. We'll hear from the featured speakers followed by a question and answer period. Please do keep entering your questions in the Q&A throughout the webinar, not the chat window, but the Q&A window, so that we can get to those questions. It is my pleasure now to introduce my very good friend, Gerry Condon, who organized the official Veterans for Peace delegation that recently visited Nicaragua, one of several that Gerry has helped organize. Gerry is a past president, national president, and current national board member of Veterans for Peace. Always happy to see you and work with you, my dear friend Gerry. Welcome, and you have the floor now.
Thank you so much, Camilo, Barbara, Yoav, Arnie. We have really been looking forward to this presentation and opportunity to share with you the tremendous experience that the Veterans for Peace delegation had in Nicaragua in late March. I'm going to say a few introductory words, then ask my fellow delegates to briefly introduce themselves. So the Monroe Doctrine was the imperial justification for U.S. intervention and exploitation in Latin America in the last 2 centuries. U.S. Marines occupied Nicaragua for years on several occasions. When they were finally chased out by Sandino, the U.S. supported the Somoza family dictatorship and trained the brutal National Guard that kept the people down until 1979. Even after the triumph of the revolution, the U.S. has never given up on undermining and overthrowing the Nicaraguan revolution, even to this very day, with a combination of electoral manipulations, regime change propaganda, attempted coups, and punishing economic sanctions. U.S. imperial hubris has only grown in scope and boldness, as the U.S. military now has 850 military bases around the world, seeks to dominate every corner of the globe. Last night's illegal, criminal, and unconstitutional U.S. bombing attack on Iran is only the latest example of U.S. militarism, which becomes all the more dangerous as the power and influence of the U.S. is gradually waning in the face of the growth and unity of the global South, including Nicaragua. I'm happy to say that U.S. veterans have had a very special relationship with Nicaragua, and we recognized very early on, as soon as the Nicaraguan Revolution happened and the U.S. Contra War began, we saw the possibility of another Vietnam War taking place in Central America, in Nicaragua and El Salvador, and immediately went into action. We had veterans delegations to Nicaragua to learn the truth and come back and share it with people in the United States in the early 1980s. Brian Wilson famously organized the Veterans Peace Walk in the war zones of Nicaragua and the Veterans Peace Action teams to rebuild schools and clinics that had been destroyed by the Contras. Some of us were very involved in organizing the Veterans Peace Convoy to Nicaragua. And then Veterans for Peace has organized several delegations, including recently one in 2019, and of course the recent delegation. So we're really proud of that legacy, and we're very happy to be able to continuing that legacy of standing in solidarity with the Nicaraguan people and their impressive revolution. Now, before we get into further sharing, I want to ask all of the delegates to briefly introduce themselves, let you know who they are. I'll start with Dan Shea.
Well, let me unmute here. Yeah, my name is Daniel Shea. I'm a Vietnam veteran, 1968, deployed to Quang Tri province in late August of that year. And you know, like all of us veterans, we have seen the horror and of wars, but we also learned by our experience the lies we were told about why we were there. And that's what we're experiencing. When I came home in 1969, October of 1969, just a year later, I was faced with the Contra wars that were going on in the 1980s, and got involved in the sanctuary movement, taking in a refugee from Guatemala and one from El Salvador at the time, very much moved by Brian Wilson's protest against arms going to the Contras, that led me to understand that the importance of veterans' voices speaking out. And that's why I'm here today.
All right. Brief introductions, please. Josh?
Yeah, hi, I'm Joshua Shurley. I'm currently the National Vice President of Veterans for Peace. Yeah, I'm a U.S. Army veteran, and I'm coming to you from Fresno, California, and I'll say a little bit more a little later. Thanks.
All right. Douglas?
Yes, thanks so much. I've been a member of Veterans for Peace since 1988, serving as the president of the Eisenhower Chapter 157 since 2015. I'm a veteran on the U.S. War on Vietnam, having served in the U.S. Navy from 64 to 67. Retired from a career as a social worker and psychotherapist. I've been active in a variety of actions throughout the years. And I'll just close with a comment from our dear friend, Vietnam veteran medic Mike Hasty, who says our government belongs in a straitjacket. Thank you.
All right, Michael?
Hi, everyone. I'm Michael Kramer. I'm the president of Veterans for Peace Chapter 21 in Northern New Jersey. I guess I'm part of the globalization of the veterans movement. I'm a veteran of the Israeli Defense Forces from 1972 to 1975, and soon after became a supporter of self-determination for the Palestinian people from the river to the sea. I also have made solidarity trips to Honduras in previous times. So this most recent tour was a refreshing eye-opener.
Thank you. Al?
Hi, my name's Al Glatkowski. I'm a merchant marine veteran of the Vietnam War, being there in late 67 and leaving in January of 68. I was involved in a mutiny. I went back to Vietnam again in 1970, was involved in a mutiny. Two of us, we seized a merchant vessel carrying napalm bombs into the war, and we removed that vessel from the conflict for a short period of time. I'm thankful to be here, and I want to say thank you, Gerry, for putting this entire group together. It was very exciting. I haven't been back to Nicaragua since I was there for the 20th anniversary of the revolution.
Great. Chris?
Hey, I'm Chris Smiley, the current communications manager for Veterans for Peace, an organization I've worked with over the years. As a journalist and media producer, I've covered Afghanistan, Iraq, Palestine for many years. And I'm really happy to now be working with Veterans for Peace, where, we get the chance to really do amazing work. And I'm really blessed to be with this organization.
Thank you. I think I got everybody. I'm going to move on here. We all had our cameras with us, and collectively, we probably have thousands of photos, frankly. I know I have 300 and some. And I just want to share a few of those photos with you to get us started, just to give you a little bit of a flavor and some images and to jog some memories for those of us, since it's been like almost a couple months now since we were there. So I'm going to put my screen share here and go to my PowerPoint from the beginning. And now, okay, there's our nice graphic that Chris put together for us. Thank you, Chris. There's the delegation, most of the delegation, and our host, Colleen Littlejohn, standing in front of this wonderful sculpture of Sandino and company. There's another group photo there. I think we're in front of the, I believe that's a women's clinic there. Here's a photo of when we met with the Sandinista youth, the Juventud Sandinista. Had several wonderful meetings with them in Managua as well as other cities. Some of the Sandinista youth there. Here's another photo of after our meeting with them. Here's Chris Smiley, who lives in Managua and happens to be the communications director and does the social media work for Veterans for Peace. And he is being interviewed here outside of Matagalpa, I think, when we were visiting with the Juventud Sandinista, delivering some aid to this woman. So they deliver monthly basic food packages and love and respect to widows who lost their husbands during either the Revolutionary War or the Contra War. This is one of those women, and with our host Colleen Littlejohn. So there's Dan Shea speaking up at one of the meetings with Josh and Michael there in the background. Here's a great photo of us outside the Casa Materna. I believe this was in Matagalpa. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that later. We got a lot of love and respect, and here's Doug being pinned with, I think, maybe an FSL pin or a Nicaragua Solidarity pin. We had a lot of media coverage, and here's me being interviewed. Another couple photos from when we visited the women with the Juventud Sandinista who were delivering the food packages. You can see some of these very young Sandinistas and very committed. There's some more of the same. There's Josh and Al enjoying some time right in a nice special park in Managua where they have all kinds of different trees and vegetation. We visited the grave of Ben Linder, the young U.S. engineer and clown and juggler who was assassinated by the Contras while he was trying to provide a water supply for a rural Nicaraguan town in northern Nicaragua. He continues to get a lot of love and respect in Nicaragua. A couple of our delegates in front of in the plaza right there, the central plaza, where a lot of the big rallies and meetings take place, and of course the famous church in the background, a cathedral. We had almost every meeting we had delegation. There was some kind of cultural performance by the people in those ministries. This was the Ministry of Health, I believe, that we were visiting. We saw Dorothy Granada, an old friend of ours, and a U.S. nurse who's been in Nicaragua for many years and is kind of famous for her resistance and her support for the revolution. There's another picture of Josh and Dorothy sharing a laugh, visiting one of the medical clinics we visited. This is co-directors of the disaster preparedness organization, CINAPRED. And we'll be talking later on about how Nicaragua has such a big emphasis on gender equality. It's Michael Kramer making a new friend here. And just a nice photo of some of us with Paul Mahali, who's with the Casa Ben Linder and married to Becca Mahali Rank, who was a big supporter. We had a great meeting with Brian Wilson, several meetings with our old friend Brian Wilson here. We'll be talking a little bit more about that later. There we are at Brian's house with that famous banner that was part of the Veterans March back in 1986 or so. And that's our good friend John Perry and his wife Abby, who gave us a tour of and told us a lot about the 2018 coup that happened in Messiah. There's Becca Rank with the front of the mural at Casa Ben Linder. Another picture of Colleen and Dorothy. There's Al enjoying the sunset in Managua, and a lot of cultural performances, you could imagine, and finally these lovely young girls who stole our hearts, and they were a lot of fun. So that's it. I just wanted to give you a quick look at our delegation experience, and now I'm going to turn it over to Veterans for Peace Vice President, National Vice President, Josh Shurley. Go ahead, Josh.
All right, thank you, Gerry. Yeah, and I just want to take a minute to, I think I speak for all of the delegation, and just really thanking Gerry so much for his tireless work in bringing all of us together and really being the driving force of putting this delegation together. Big thanks to the webinar organizers and really just to everybody who made this such a fulfilling and enriching trip. It's a real honor to be a part of this delegation with my fellow veterans. I think we all, some of us knew each other from before, some of us were meeting for the first time, but we've definitely fostered some long-term friendships. And it was great to get to Nicaragua. You know, there are a lot of things that are said. It was my first time in Nicaragua, and so I had a lot of questions. And of course, it bears mention that all of this we're talking today, less than a day after the U.S. just launched criminal airstrikes against Iran, right, and another illegal act of aggression from the world's most heavily armed empire. And it bears mentioning that what we're talking about here today is not a side issue, right? It's all part of the same global struggle. The same tyranny that targets Iran ultimately is the same that targets Nicaragua and another handful of countries, right? And so our shared humanity really depends on breaking through this web of lies, this imperial narrative. And so that's why trips like this are so invaluable. So, I mean, you know, again, it was my first time in Nicaragua. I did have, I'll be honest, a lot of questions, right? Because, you know, many of us as veterans, we've been used, right? Used to sell wars based on lies. From Vietnam to Iraq and Afghanistan and in countless other ways. So, I mean, I can speak for myself. I went to definitely to learn and to question and to learn with humility. And what we found was a society, a democratic society centered on its people. And the truth is that Nicaragua is feared in many ways by Washington, not because it's failing in some way, but because it's working, right? It's feared because what it's doing is working. What seems to scare Washington is that Nicaragua is a part of a handful of nations that dares to invest in its people. That it challenges the idea that poverty and inequality are somehow natural or inevitable. And it reminds us what is possible when people and not corporations get to set the agenda. So, you know, so many things that we could talk about that we witnessed, and we'll hear, about a lot of these details. Just to touch on a couple of things, right? Things like healthcare, education, poverty eradication, right? So just to talk about healthcare real quick, we'll maybe hear about some of the clinics and medical professionals that we visited. But healthcare in Nicaragua, as most of us know, it's universal, right? It's public and it's growing. Just to touch on a few specifics, reductions in maternal mortality of up to 70%, right? Reductions of infant mortality of about 56% compared to the previous government. Compare that to the United States, where access to healthcare is not just shrinking, it's collapsing in many cases, right? Especially in certain areas of the United States. And that difference is really stark, especially when you consider the vast wealth, right, that this country holds. So that's extremely important. And then just to talk about things like education. We met with young people, for example, students who were celebrating the 1980 literacy campaign in Nicaragua, very much modeled on the sort of the Cuban model, right? An effort that was not just about teaching literacy to rural populations, but also to build consciousness, to build solidarity. And in the U.S., and again, compare that to the U.S., where education is systematically under attack, right? I'm an educator here in my day job, and here, what are we seeing? We're seeing an increase in book bans and gutted funding and scripted miseducation. And so again, these differences are stark. You look at poverty eradication, things like gender equity, in so many ways, Nicaragua, again, is showing us what is possible. So Nicaragua, for example, ranking among the most gender equal in not just in the hemisphere, but in the world, right? In terms of family support, land reform, economic programs, so many things that are working. And I think what one thing that really struck me deeply is the living memory that Nicaraguans have. This is something that I think we all sort of heard time and time again. The ability to critically reflect on their own recent history. So there is all this lived experience, right? People who remember not just the first Sandinista revolution and all of its gains and its challenges, but then the subsequent neoliberal years, right? When privatization and austerity returned, and we constantly heard about this theme of neglect, and then the return of the Sandinista movement with its focus on dignity, on equity, on sovereignty. So they're able to really look back and compare these time periods and compare the material conditions and the sense that they had not just a government, but a societal movement that really cared about them. And again, to bring it back to contrast, right? Contrast this with the United States, where we really struggle with this political memory amongst the U.S. population. It's so rare in the United States, where we really have this sort of collective amnesia has been fostered, right? And I mean, just to use one example, we see that today with how many people don't seem to remember 2003 and the lies that got us into Iraq, just to pick one example. Nicaraguans know very well what they have gained, and the vast majority do not want to go back. Yeah, so I mean, just to admit, I had certain misgivings and concerns, questions before the trip. Reports from so-called human rights groups had raised a lot of questions, and I hope we'll get to touch on some of those concerns. But I have come to understand how deeply many of those narratives are embedded in the standard script of regime change operations, right? And I think we'll talk more a little bit about the 2018 attempted coup and the idea that this was not some kind of spontaneous uprising. This was a foreign-backed destabilization effort, using the same script we've seen from Venezuela to Bolivia and beyond. And I'll close on just this idea of how important it is. I think the big struggle that we face in our society sometimes is not necessarily learning about some of these things. The key hurdle, to my mind, is unlearning so much of the conditioning and the propaganda that the average American experiences, right? And so, this unlearning is not just an intellectual exercise. It is it's a political awakening. It's how we step out of the illusion of the empire and step into the real world, a world of possibility, of solidarity. And so I'll just close and say thank you again. Thanks to Gerry. Thanks to all my fellow veterans who who I learned so much from along the way. And I'll just say Nicaragua really reminds us that another path exists, right? And that's exactly why we are warned away from it. So all these things, again, are connected. If we are to confront fascism here at home or in a number of other places, we need clarity. We need courage, and we need to listen to those who are not just resisting empire, but are building alternatives. And I think that's the driving takeaway that most of us got from this trip. So solidarity, you know, it's how we survive. It's how we build. It's how ultimately we win. And so thank you, and I look forward to hearing from my fellow veterans and some Q&A, and I'll turn it over to whoever's next, Gerry. You're muted, Gerry.
Thank you, Josh. I'm going to
Okay.
hear from Douglas Ryder now.
Yes, thank you, Josh, for those wonderful comments, and thank you all to invite us here to speak to you today. So I'm going to speak briefly, hopefully, with a meeting with Harold Urbana, who works for the Ben Linder community. He has lived in Nicaragua, he has seen the revolutions, and he has participated actively in the FSLN movement for a period of time. And one of the things that he offered that I didn't know, and I want to share this, some of you already may know this, but I want to share the following. So when the FSLN lost the 1990 election, they returned to grassroots organizing and recognized the importance of seeing former adversaries as fellow Nicaraguans, regardless of political background. This meant building partnerships and alliances even with former enemies, inspired by Sandino's vision of national unity beyond political divisions. The FSLN prioritized social programs such as free education and healthcare, and deliberately included former opponents like ex-Contras in these programs. This practical inclusion helped break down old hostility and fostered trust. Leaders, including Daniel Ortega, publicly engaged in acts of reconciliation, such as asking for forgiveness and dialoguing with former enemies. These gestures were replicated at local events, helping to heal divisions. For the 2006 election, the FSLN ran under the banner Alliance Nicaragua United Triumphs, emphasizing unity and reconciliation rather than partisan identity. And upon returning to power, they declared a government of national unity and reconciliation. The leadership has emphasized peace as a central value, believing that development and citizen security can only be achieved without war and polarization. This commitment was reflected in community-based security efforts and the avoidance of exclusionary policies. The government has focused on restoring rights lost during previous neoliberal administrations, improving the public infrastructure, ensuring broad access to education, to health, which helped win over non-Sandinista citizens. These actions collectively have shifted public perception, reduced polarization, and built a foundation for national reconciliation by combining symbolic gestures and inclusive policies to focus on peace and shared progress. I'll close by saying I think we could learn a lot from this model. We are so divided within our own country that we have much work to come to before we could even begin to move in a singular direction of peace and justice. So I'll close there, and I thank you all. There's more in the article from Ken Yale, who interviewed Harold, and I will post a link in the chat for those who are interested in more detailed discussion, which I have only briefly discussed. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Douglas. Next, we're going to hear from Al Glatkowski, who did not mention in his introduction that he spent the better part of 10 years in prison for his acts of resistance to the Vietnam War. So Al, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Gerry. A lot of the things that I want to talk about, and I'm going to do my best to be very specific, have already been discussed, and then we will probably each discuss the similar things because we all went to the same organizational meetings and had this opportunity to interact with the folks and ask questions and more importantly, to listen to the answers. I would like to talk about meeting agricultural at an agricultural university. And it was a highlight for me because I used to have a farm, an organic farm. And I also raised honeybees and dairy goats, and I have a hands-on understanding of that type of work. And I think one of the most important things that I heard and was able to interact with people to discuss was Nicaragua's ability to, despite sanctions and limited resources, this incredible program that they started to become food, not food, they wanted to become food sovereign.
They call it food sovereignty, right?
Yes, that's what it was. Thank you, Gerry. And to actually produce food in a large amount so they didn't have to have it imported. I've been to countries where food is imported and it's everything's it's very expensive and very high, and it leaves a certain dimension of people that that can't afford the foods that some people look at as luxuries, but just rice and beans is not necessarily luxury. It is a staple for many people in this world. So it's interesting to see that they were able to produce, to increase their own sovereignty of about 90% of the food that they has consumed in Nicaragua. Those are fantastic numbers. And nobody can argue against them. They're fantastic. And when you look at the energy.
Yeah, Al, they also make Nicaragua less vulnerable to U.S. sanctions, which is important as well. Huh?
Absolutely, it does. And I appreciate you bringing that up because I started it off by saying, despite the sanctions and the limited resources, and it goes to other things as well. It goes to education. It goes to healthcare, rural healthcare projects. And one of the most exciting things I heard, we went and visited a clinic, and I would like to, in the United States, the closest thing we ever had was back in the 60s and the early 70s were the free clinics. But they have free healthcare in Nicaragua. And of course, you can also buy your healthcare, but you can also participate in the country's system. And that's a choice you have to make. And I would support it, being that I was there back in the 20th anniversary during the times of liberalism. And I was there as a person to understand and see Nicaragua for my first time until this last trip. And I organized, because we had an organic grocery store at our farm, I organized to bring in about $10,000 worth of neonatal supplements for women. I worked with my wife and our local nurse midwife. And when it was illegal in the state that I live in to have a nurse midwife to deliver the baby solely by themselves. And we canvassed and we went to the state legislature to actually get that so that it was legal in our state to have nurse midwives. Well, it's pretty standard in Nicaragua. One of the things I saw was that I believe it was called Casa Materna or Materna, Casa Materna. And it was amazing how that program worked, that for 30 days prior to the baby being born, women that had the possibility of having their pregnancy terminated because of illness or whatever, the government allowed them to have a safe place and provided this safe place in rural areas. And I understand that it's throughout Nicaragua, and I'm certain that we will hear from other people that that's the case. We had an opportunity to see, I think, 2 or 3 of these places, and it was amazing. The women are brought in, they're taken care of. They have their own bed, their own place, and their own helpers, and they are assisted to go to the hospital with their nurses as well to have this delivery done. And then when the baby is delivered, it comes back to the same facility for another up to 30 more days if they choose, or it could be possibly more if there's problems at home. We don't have anything like that in the States. I looked at this from that side. I looked at the agricultural side of it, and it's amazing that I don't even think the United States produces 90% of our food resources. And so those were the 2 things that really struck home until we had another meeting. And Gerry, I need your help there. There was a meeting where we met with folks for disaster preparedness. Do you recall the name of that?
CINAPRED, yes.
Thank you. Thank you. It just so happens in the rural area that I lived in for about 25 years was on the Outer Banks of North Carolina, where we are, it's the harshest weather in all of the United States. And I was on, because I'm a licensed contractor, I was also a volunteer member of hurricane preparedness and also disaster, being able to be the first on the ground at a disaster area due to a hurricane. And we very quickly pulled together our resources, but we had resources Nicaragua does not have. We had satellite connection to the internet. In this little small town of 500, I think now it's around 650 people. Up and down the Outer Banks, we have these small towns. And our assistance from the federal government came in the way of how fast we could get our report into the federal government. If other areas could get it in faster that were not so isolated, they got the resources before we would. And we needed those resources because it was the poorest part of that state, not necessarily the islands, but inland from the islands, that entire region was the poorest in all of North Carolina. And one of the things I saw, or they told me what they were doing, was how they broke down the analysis and got it to the government through cadres. And I thought that was wonderful. It was a wonderful idea. In the United States, we're volunteers, and they don't call us cadres. And hopefully you're working with somebody that's that has an aligned vision that you have. Sometimes you don't get that opportunity. But with the system and the politics that I saw there, the information flowed easily, and you have far more disaster areas than we did. We only had the hurricanes and fires, but you've got earthquakes, you've got the volcanoes, you've got climate change, you have hurricanes too from both sides. And so it's amazing what I saw being done and how they put it together without the same resources we had in the United States, where I was issued a laptop, iPad, and I could fill out where every state. I sat in the map and I could fill out every single house and how much damage there was there on these different facilities. So that's what I'd like to say, is that I witnessed this, and I never saw any of this when I was there for the 20th anniversary of the revolution. It's night and day. The government has definitely grown, and they've learned from the mistakes. And they had the Sandinistas lost their power, and then they came back in on a free election. And I think Gerry Condon may talk more about that, or maybe it will be Michael. But it was amazing to get this insight from the 20th anniversary to the, what is it now, the 43rd is coming up, I believe.
46.
I'm sorry?
46.
The 46th, thank you. And so night and day difference. I don't know enough about all of the intricacies. I do want to come back, and I would like to have my feet on the ground there again and be able to visit different places. I appreciate so much for the hospitality that everyone provided us. Thank you so much, Al Glatkowski out.
This or closer.
Jerry's back. You're on, Jerry.
Yeah, temporarily got knocked off. Sorry about that. So yeah, I just thank you, Al. That's great. We were so impressed overall by Nicaragua's commitment to prioritizing the needs of the poorest and most vulnerable, and the poverty reduction, dramatic reductions in poverty, and establishment of strong safety nets for those who still remain in poverty. And that is not just a talking point, and it's not just something we heard in meetings. It's palpable in the society. Everywhere you go, you can feel it. And because of that, the government has a lot of support. I was actually in Nicaragua in 2021 as accompanying the election, not an official observer, but I was an observer, and I was actually in the Northern Autonomous Region, just something we didn't visit the autonomous regions on this trip, but there's about 30% of the Nicaragua land is in autonomous regions, semi-autonomous, indigenous control, and Afro-American, Afro-Caribbean control. Very impressive. But at any rate, I was in Bilwi for the election, and it was the most transparent and well-organized election you could imagine, a real example for the world. And actually, in the autonomous region where I observed, they got the highest percentage of vote for Daniel Ortega, 75%. Now, overall in the country, I think it was about a 65% turnout, even though the Catholic Church and some opponents of the revolution called for a boycott of the election. They had a 65% turnout and 70% vote for Daniel Ortega and his government. And that the current polling consistently shows that Ortega and Rosario Murillo, who are now co-presidents of Nicaragua, maintain that about a 70% approval rating. And it's a direct result, certainly, of their very visible and meaningful commitment to taking care of the needs of the people above all. And that's just evident in pretty much every aspect of society. One thing that was particularly amazing, really, is the commitment that Nicaragua has to gender equality. And it's huge. They actually have by law a requirement that the parties who submit candidates must submit at least 50% women on their ballots as their candidates. I understand that I think maybe over half of the cabinet level positions in the government are held by women. And now we have directives to the various government ministries and municipalities that women must share power. Typically, ministries are adopting a co-director model where they have a man and a woman. If there's in the cities, if there's a man who's a mayor, then the vice mayor will be a woman. I don't know if they have co-mayors yet. And recently, Daniel Ortega and his wife and a longtime Sandinista leader, Rosario Murillo, who was serving as vice president, have become co-presidents. And some people might think that's a very strange arrangement. Some people thought it was strange that Ortega's wife was vice president, but in Nicaragua, it's very well accepted, and they understand the leadership that Rosario Murillo provides in the society. And like I say, they maintain a high level of popular support, even though they certainly have a virulent opposition that continues and has collaborated in too many cases with attempts by the U.S. To undermine and even organize a coup in 2018. I think that we'll be hearing more about that shortly. I'll pass it on now to Dan Shea from Portland, Oregon.
Okay, thank you, Gerry, and thanks to everybody, Josh and Al and
Oh, I just want to, Dan, I'm
Doug
sorry.
for
I just
speaking.
want to,
Pardon?
I just want to finish one point, and that's when talking about gender equality. So the number of international organizations who rate gender equality have rated Nicaragua 6th in the entire world in gender equality and number 1 in the Western Hemisphere. So thanks, Dan. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. And in fact, that's what we saw when we went to the various ministries and even to little towns where the mayor would come out. It would be both male and female mayors. Oftentimes, the woman would be the mayor, and the vice or the co-mayor would be a male. So I was really impressed with that. So thank you for bringing that up. That's very important. Um, one of the things, I wanted to cover was a little bit about the 2018 coup, but you have to understand where, a little history and a little bit of where I come from. Now, why am I even concerned about what's going on in Nicaragua? Well, I'm also just one generation away from immigrants from Panama. My father and my aunts and uncles were born there. My grandmother was a Panamanian of Spanish, Afro, and indigenous Panamanian. So it's in my blood. It's just part of me, and I grew up with that knowledge at a very young age. And so whenever I see conflicts that are happening in the South, whether it's in the Central America or in Latin America, I try to pay close attention to it. And though I had been to Venezuela twice over the years, but I had not been to Nicaragua. This is my first time. But I wasn't unfamiliar with it. I was familiar with it in many ways of following the posts and the things that were happening in Nicaragua during the coup, especially with Camilo, who was writing a lot about it at the time, and we were exchanging posts off and on with people. And he wrote a letter, which he may refer to here, but I went back and read it, and it was the open letter to Amnesty International. So you will see that even during the coup, there's a question that's raised about how is it that there are many people on the left that turned away from the revolution and the successes of the revolution. They were, Amnesty International, there were NGOs, there were former supporters of the Sandinista revolution, and they basically turned their backs on the revolution and followed the script that the U.S. was putting forward in the media. So Camilo challenged that as somebody who was actually being supported for his resistance to the Iraq War by Amnesty International, and he reminds them of that, and that it was his hometown. So that's what I wanted to, just bring that up briefly. Also, I just saw that the New York Times had an article commemorating basically Violeta Chamorro. And all these, it was Kenzier, who I'm just trying to think if I've got it here. I got to go back to my notes here. Yeah. So you have to keep in mind that, what Chomsky and others have said about manufacturing consent. That's the whole idea of reaching and creating these color revolutions, which you have to understand that they use social media in which to reach out to people. So if you're looking at the news or social media and you see something, I just saw this sort of glowing report about Chamorro by Stephen Kenzier, who's written a lot on Latin American issues in the past. But the problem is that they ignore the problems that occurred during her run as a president. Some of the problems, which I kind of looked up. One thing, when you go to these delegations and you don't know shit about it, and you learn from the people while you're there, And then you have to come back and try and put that in some kind of perspective in your head. It means you got to go back and research. And so, I have to, it's not just relying on people that I met, but also going back and researching things. And so I see that, when Chamorro was the presidency, the neoliberal reforms in Nicaragua included social and economic decline, increase in poverty, inequality. Neoliberal policies included privatization and fiscal austerity, led to mass layoffs, reduced social spending, higher prices, contributing to the decline in standard of living, increase in poverty and inequality, reduced social services, public spending on healthcare and education decreased, leading to reduced access to essential services and eliminating programs like child development centers. I mean, we're seeing that happening here now in the United States, this neoliberal programming that is going on here by a fascist regime of Trump and his cronies are trying to privatize everything. That's what neoliberalism is the privatization and the selling off of government entities that your tax dollars pay for, that are meant for you and the government to be co-equals and supporting each other. So then the second impact on the conflict and resolution failure to address post-war needs. The government failed to adequately address the needs of those that were displaced by the Civil War, such as former combatants and refugees, contributing to instability and violence in the rural areas. Doug, you talked about, this reconciliation. Well, there's reconciliation among people who care about coming together and really making a difference. But the opposition did not give a fuck. I'm sorry. They didn't care because they began to plan a revolution. They began to undermine the revolution from one day to the next. And I think we have to understand that. And that's, the propaganda and the money that comes from the U.S. in which to put up the opposition and support them in any ways they can to disrupt the revolution. Doesn't mean that there's not, there's honest criticism that can be said against any government, and that's just normal things. But free speech doesn't mean using violence to overthrow a government. And what eventually happens, of course, is that once Chamorro had lost the election, and the Sandinistas, Daniel Ortega, they began to rebuild the infrastructure, began to nationalize immediately healthcare and education and make it available to people to try and meet the needs of the people. So I think that was important to understand. Well, the opposition immediately, because they lost the election and because the U.S. doesn't like Daniel Ortega or the revolution, and businesses and USAID and the National Endowment for Democracy began a program of social media to inflame issues. And one thing I learned from John Perry when we did an interview. Yes.
Thank you, Dan. Hate to cut you short, but we're at an hour. We got two more people to present, and we want to leave some time for Q&A. So I got to move along. You want to say some final words? I would like to say
that, John Perry, at least he gave us a brief overview of what happened during that revolution and how Messiah was basically taken over by the opposition and were violent and basically stopped all production, anybody coming in or out of where he lived. And they killed policemen, they took over stations, they tortured a person on the ground, smashed his arm, who eventually had to be amputated. And to understand that they lived through that process, one should always look up John Perry's articles, because he gives a really good breakdown on all of those issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Great presentation. So our delegation was there for basically 7 days. but one of our members, Chris, actually lives in Nicaragua and has lived there for a couple of years now. So he has some particularly interesting perspectives. Chris, it's all yours.
Thanks, Gerry. Yeah, I had actually gone down with the delegation, Veterans for Peace 2019, and I was so impressed and just blown away by the country that I had to come back. So I came back on my own. I had just been kind of living abroad. I wanted to kind of get out of the United States. It was really getting to me, just the culture of violence and, what we live in and being in, the heart of the empire. So, I found myself always coming back to Nicaragua, and I eventually settled down there. I felt like I wanted to invest my time and money into a good country like Nicaragua instead of having all my money and taxes go into war and imperialism around the world. And I get a lot of questions from people, because I live there and I am fluent in Spanish now. So I'm really able to get a good experience with people there. And I think the number one question I always get asked is it safe? Like, are you afraid? And it's just such a silly question to me because it's literally the safest country I've ever been to in my life, far safer than the United States. I know when I came to the airport to pick up other delegation members on this trip, one of our members, I forget who it was, said, I don't see many homeless people around here. And I said, yeah, that's correct. I don't think I've ever even seen a tent on the side of the road. Whereas in America, supposedly the richest country in the world, tents line all of our major cities. And Nicaragua, which is still dealing with, poverty, I forget where they're at, but it's one of the more impoverished nations in this part of the world. They use their resources to take care of their people. People are afforded homes at no cost by the government if they don't have a home. So people are housed. The rates of electricity are staggered. So the people in the lower income folks will pay a lesser rate than maybe in where I live in a little bit nicer area. So, being in a country like that where they're taking care of the people, education and healthcare is free. I mean, it's incredible. Like I can go to any hospital, no questions asked, no payment required. There's also semi-private hospitals. We actually go to one because it's just more convenient, but it's only $30 a month and everything is included, literally everything. Doctor visits, medicine, everything for $30 a month. And yeah, just living in Nicaragua, in a country where it supports revolutionary movements around the world. They broke ground on Palestine Park about a year or so ago, as opposed to my country, which is funding the genocide in Palestine. So it's just been such an incredible experience to live in a revolutionary socialist nation. And also, being there and being able to speak Spanish, I do talk to folks. And being in Managua, which is probably where you'll find more people that are counter to the Sandinista party, because in the countryside, that's where you'll find the strongest supporters, because what the Sandinista party has done for the people out in the countryside is just incredible, lifting them out of absolute extreme poverty, giving them chances to develop food and agriculture, as Glatkowski mentioned. And, a lot of the criticisms I hear are just, they're never from left-wing perspectives. They're usually from right-wing perspectives wanting to increase capitalism and control of the country. Or it just comes from just a misunderstanding of politics. Just like we might find in the United States, just hearing different viewpoints from libertarians or whatever their criticisms might be. So it's a true revolutionary socialist project, and I invite anyone to come down and learn about it. And I'm always there, as a point of contact and reference to give the best tips on what to see and what to do. It's also an amazingly beautiful country. The nature, the beaches are incredible. So it's been great to be there and be able to help delegations like this. And I hope that we can bring more delegations in the future. Thanks, Gerry.
Thank you, Chris. It was great seeing you in Managua. Michael Kramer is our final presenter, and he has a special perspective, as he mentioned before. He's actually a veteran, a long time ago, of the Israeli Defense Forces. Michael, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. This was a wonderful trip, and thank you, Gerry, for pulling it together. But I also want to thank, it would not have happened without the help and assistance of 3 special North American activists who are dedicating their lives to struggle in Nicaragua. And Becca Rank was amazing, who assisted us so well. Colleen Littlejohn, who hosted us, and our own Chris Smiley, who dealt with incredible stress of broken down cars and fitting people from 4 vehicles to 3 vehicles, or 3 vehicles to 2 vehicles, and while on the road. So
and Becca gave us a simultaneous translation the entire time.
Right, she was amazing. So this wouldn't have happened without them. So I just wanted to talk briefly about the Juventud Sandinista, which is the youth arm of the FSLN. And we had a chance to meet with them extensively. We met with teenagers on the streets of Matagalpa. We met with college students at the new Casimiro Sotelo National University. And we met with other college students at an agrarian university outside of Matagalpa. And we met with Sandinista youth at a technical school where they're studying to work in the tourism industry or the hotel industry, preparing food, learning to be a bartender, learning to be a cook, or a baker. And so we really saw the breadth of the Sandinista movement. And is every young person in Nicaragua in the Juventud Sandinista? No. Is every young person a supporter and not a member? No. But there is a core of people that so impressed me with their discipline, with their anti-imperialist views, with their drive to build a new Nicaragua. And I can only put it in what I saw in context with my other visits to Central America. And you know, you think of El Salvador with an indoor concentration camp filled with literally tens of thousands of mostly young people. Honduras, where despite election of a progressive person, Xiomara Castro Zelaya, death squads are still rampant in the countryside. In Panama, Dan mentioned his Panamanian background. I have close friends who are Panamanian and descendants of the ditch diggers, the workers who came from Jamaica and Barbados to dig the big ditch, and whose descendants face rampant racism. This is not the case in Nicaragua, where Afro-Nicaraguans actually have an autonomous region. We didn't have a chance to discuss that. Or Costa Rica, whose economy based on tourism is now deteriorating at a fast rate, and petty crime is all over, an unsafe place. And yet in Nicaragua, the vibe, as Chris pointed out, tremendous sense of safety. I mean, I felt I could, and I had made a previous trip where, you know, my wife and I felt comfortable walking around at night, lost in Managua, in working class neighborhoods, not, you know, hotel area. And no, you know, the vibe.
That's a good point. That's a good point, Michael, because I understand the U.S. State Department has recently put out a new advisory trying to scare tourists from going to Nicaragua. They don't claim it's because of street crime. They claim that you have to watch out for the authoritarian government. You never know what might happen.
Right. I grew up in an urban environment, very urban, where I have built-in radar, things like this. And I could turn my radar off. That's how I felt in Nicaragua. And I know we have a Q&A thing, so just close it out. Josh used the word dignity. And just to give an example, previous trip to Nicaragua, in Managua, public transportation, was in the form of a school bus with a large diesel, smoky, noisy engine. And the bus would pull up at a stop and someone would pop their head out of the front door and yell out where the bus was going. Not the case anymore. The government has made arrangements with the People's Republic of China and is now importing buses. So when you add a bus stop and the bus pulls in, it has a number on top, and you can automatically know which bus you're getting on. And that's just a sense of dignity. People ride in comfortable seats, not seats built for school children. So yeah, Nicaragua is a work in progress. We support the FSLN, and it's up to the people of Nicaragua and the members of the FSLN to decide who they want to be their leaders, and we respect their decisions. It was a very wonderful, eye-opening trip. And just one last thing on this recent, yesterday's US attack on Iran with B-2 bombers. The news is all about how China feel about it and the Russian Federation. But we have to also think, how does a country like Nicaragua feel about an attack like this when Al pointed out food self-sufficiency is not only based on growing and harvesting, but packaging plants, easy targets. Mm-hmm. So once again, we support the people in Nicaragua and particularly the youth who are wonderful. Mm-hmm. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Michael. Well, so that's our story, and we're sticking to it. We have a extensive written report that was just published this week with lots of photos as well in Countercurrents. I'm going to put that link in the chat. Then I'm going to turn it back to our co-host here, Camilo Mejía.
Thank you, Gerry. We don't have that much time for Q&A, so I'll be brief. I think yesterday's bombing of Iran was only possible thanks to the US and the West propaganda machine. I think that's probably one of its most formidable weapons against countries that refuse to be subjugated. So as a Nicaraguan, I just want to sincerely thank each and every one of my brothers from Veterans for Peace for your unwavering support of my country and for standing alongside our people to bear witness to the reality in Nicaragua. Forever grateful to you, and I'll pass it to Barbara for the Q&A portion.
Thanks, Camilo. So Camilo and I are going to be looking through your questions that the audience posed in the Q&A, and we'll pose questions to the speakers in turn. And I had not quite gotten to the point of picking my favorite question here, but I think I'll just go with the one that's right in front of me, which is from Will Griffin. And it says, how is Nicaragua free or independent from imperialism, especially U.S. imperialism, when there is, I'm paraphrasing now, when there are so many major U.S. corporations throughout Nicaragua? And doesn't that mean that they're really not as much of a threat as we're saying they are? So why is it then that Washington is wanting regime change, I guess? And I'm not sure who might like to address that question. Is there somebody?
Some of it.
Okay.
One thing is that the government has a treaty with the U.S. and CAFTA, and through their economic trade, there is some relationship with the businesses, but it's a partnership of some socialist movements with the government and with business, and so compromise in some ways, which is what I saw. But what I did see is that through those efforts, they were creating a peace among people in the business sector and the working sector, and bringing people together and using funds and taxes to provide for education, healthcare, and raising the standard of living for everyone. That's the best I can answer that. The
And
other is
and
does the
Dan,
government?
Colleen Littlejohn chimed in here in
Yeah,
the chat. You
exactly.
see that? She says only about 14% of the economy is big business. The rest is small and medium. And major economic government programs support local, rural, and urban small enterprises.
Including cooperatives, I believe.
That's
The
right.
government is promoting them.
I'll just make a quick comment. My wife and I took 4 delegations to Cuba, mediators, lawyers, therapists, back when. And one of the things that they did with international actions was to keep control locally. So if they were building a hotel, you know, the outside agency wasn't able to own the hotel, but they were, you know, renting, so to speak, on the land. So I think there are ways that Nicaragua can protect itself from outside imperialistic efforts.
Yeah, I'd like to add on that this is change. The economies in the global South are changing so fast because of the impact of the People's Republic of China and the impact of BRICS. And what we see now in terms of Nicaragua's relationship with the U.S., I think will be changing very quickly. So you can explore that on your own, but BRICS is the way to go for the global South.
Okay.
And I wouldn't mind just
Independence is the food sovereignty, I think, is one of the major things that keeps it going. And tourism is booming there. We were there.
Yeah, I'll just add one
Josh,
quick,
you wanted to add something?
yeah, I'll just add one quick thing, and I want to thank Will for the question because it's a good question, and it's something that I've sort of questioned too, just looking around, and you see, you know, some of the presence of you know, U.S. corporations here and there, and just that it, in a sense, the answer is kind of baked into the question that you asked, which again was a really good one, and that is just that no one is really free from the consequences of imperialism. You know, and so how a society chooses to negotiate that terrain is going to be unique and independent, you know, in each country. But this is exactly why, you know, we need to not just focus on people and even certain political ideologies, but focus on systems. I mean, these are, you know, the imperialist sort of capitalist modes of production is something that everyone has to navigate in some way, shape, or form. And you said it in your question beautifully, right? Which is that it seems to be just enough engagement with U.S. Commerce to not necessitate a military intervention, and that's, I think, kind of a sad fact that they do have to navigate that terrain. And we, you know, I think that we all see this, right? That playing ball with the empire doesn't make you safe from that intervention. So it's a dangerous game to play. And you know, the U.S. operate like gangsters, and so how people and how societies navigate that is very difficult, and it puts, you know, Nicaragua is in a tough place. But they continue and they struggle, and so the threat isn't necessarily that they are completely free and independent, because we are a global society. We need to engage, you know, with other countries, and Nicaraguans don't want to be completely isolated. So how to do that engagement, how to walk that fine line is difficult. So anyway, that's the best I have to answer that. So, but thanks for the good question.
I think I would like to just add that the threat is always there. For example, there is something of a push by some portions of the U.S. government to try to get Nicaragua out of CAFTA. And that would be a major financial blow, I think, to the country. And then every year also, the President of the United States once again recertifies that Nicaragua poses some kind of serious threat. I'm not using the right words, but serious threat to the U.S., which is ridiculous, of course, but that's something they say every year. Okay, I'll turn it over to Camilo.
Thank you. One last thing about that. Nicaragua was the only government after the Sandinista government was the only government after the neoliberal period to sit down and negotiate CAFTA DR. It was the only country that actually forced a partnership to protect Nicaragua's natural resources, workforce, and sovereignty. So I think that's something that should be also kept in mind when people think about the deals that are made between Nicaragua and transnational companies and whatnot. The next question is by Dennis Korthauer. He says, I spent a month in Nicaragua picking cotton with a brigade back during the Contra War in 82 or 83. I am disturbed by the reports I read of oppression by the Nicaraguan national government, changes in the constitution, and what is described by numerous groups and press organizations of dictatorial powers of the Ortegas. Could you please address these issues? Thank you. Before I turn it to the panelists, I mean, look at the bombardment yesterday. Organizations, international organizations paved the way for that bombardment to happen, both by Israel and the United States, including by the International Atomic Energy Agency, that basically provide cover and justification for the bombardment. This is not something new. We should be paying more attention to these reports. Who finances these organizations? Who finances a lot of these groups? Dan talked about the open letter I wrote to Amnesty, precisely because of the role that they were playing in justifying the attempted soft coup in Nicaragua. But anyway, I'd like to turn it over to the panelists to answer this question. It's in the Q&A if you want to read it, but the floor is open.
What is that question, Camilo?
It's related to articles written by organizations about oppression by the Nicaraguan government, changes in the constitution, and what is described by numerous groups and press organizations as these dictatorial powers of the Ortegas. Can you answer that? What did you see?
Well, you know, I think we've kind of addressed that already, but there's a very aggressive campaign of regime change propaganda against Nicaragua. And unfortunately, some of the liberal organizations and human rights groups are all too willing, sometimes even UN human rights reports buy into this one-sided reporting, usually from people who haven't even been to Nicaragua. A prejudice where they're willing to say that Daniel Ortega is a dictator, even though he's probably got elected in the fairest election in the world. So it's just, it's rampant and it's relentless, and it comes from so many directions at once that, of course, people, even like Josh said, well, he was wondering what's going on, because if you hear that from three different directions or more, you think, well, there must be some truth to it. But in fact, it's misinformed at best, and oftentimes very dishonest, conscious attempts to undermine both international support as well as domestic support for the Nicaraguan revolution. And maybe others will have more to say about it. But it's very discouraging, actually, for many of us. And I remember Chuck Kaufman, who used to head up the Nicaraguan Network, Presente. He and the Alliance for Global Justice would often say, you know, you can push back against those lies for the rest of your lives. And many of us try to do so. But it's kind of like pushing a boulder uphill. What we found is even more effective, and what Chuck proposed is to talk about the accomplishments of the revolution, and that's what we're trying to do. If you see that social progress and experience it firsthand, you know, the proof is in the pudding. If that's not the result of a dictatorship, a corrupt dictatorship. That's the result of a country that's, excuse me, a country that's deeply committed, and Jesus Christ, excuse me, my phone is going crazy here.
We hear you, Gerry. Well,
Yeah, we hear you. Well, maybe we should move on. Thank you, Gerry.
That's a
We don't have
reality.
much time left, but I'm just going to refer to one more question which popped up by at least two people. And it has to do with LGBTQIA plus and what kinds of rights do people in those particular populations enjoy in Nicaragua? I can't definitively answer that, but I know that I have had reports that they enjoy pretty good rights actually and a lot of respect, but I'm wondering what you observed or what you learned.
Okay, I would just say that on some of our visits, I was able to see, and I'll use the term gender nonconforming instructors and students, comfortably part of the whole thing at the school, whether they're in the classroom or whether they were leading the classroom or they were part of the student body. And, you know, that was my observation. I didn't see.
Yeah, I'll just add a little something to that. And it partially, I think, addresses the previous question as well. You know, this idea of, well, it speaks to the sort of idea of government repression, so-called, and all of that. So many contrasts we could draw with the U.S., but getting to the aspects of LGBTQIA plus equality, I think it's important to draw a distinction, first of all, between you know, what somebody thinks of as a government and what we saw in Nicaragua, which is a movement. You know, the Sandinista movement is not about a top-down government program. It is a popular movement, and it's largely youth-led. And a lot of these issues that are brought up, especially with young people and gender non-conforming folks and all of that, a lot of that is generational. And so when you have such a movement that is so youth-driven, those issues are at the forefront of concerns. And so, you know, so many, for example, we went to a lot of meetings with government agencies doing different family support, human services type things. And in every case, there was that was integrated into their scope, into their function, was how do we address those issues and these particular vulnerable populations in ways, again, that in the US we're getting away from protecting vulnerable populations, whereas Nicaragua is leaning into it. Again, not to say that everything is perfect or that everyone has, you know, the quote unquote correct view or whatever it might be, but as a government that is pushed by this movement, they really do seem to be you know, integrating those concerns in a major way, and it's a priority, and you really get that sense, whether we're talking about, you know, neighborhood health clinics, all of these things. So yeah, I just wanted to make that observation.
Anyone else? Okay. Well, our webinar is drawing to a close. It's we're actually at the 90 minutes right now, but we'd like to invite everyone to offer any brief final words that you may have, and we'll just go around and just speak spontaneously. Then I guess Camilo and I will close it out. Okay?
I'll start first. I was asked by one of my comrades of many years back in the penitentiary days, and he asked me how I felt when I was there. And I told him I felt very similar as I did in Vietnam when I returned to Vietnam with my son for a private tour. And I said I felt safe there in Vietnam, and I felt safe in Nicaragua. And that was good for someone like me to be able to feel safe. That's all. Thank you.
We'll add final comments. One thing is that when the issue was raised about you know, the repression, one thing that people forget is that even these reports of like 222 people that were exiled from the country and et cetera, who are they and who are they speaking of? As Camilo said, know who you're dealing with. Oftentimes, these were people that were involved in the most violent actions in during the 2018 coup, were imprisoned and then released under an amnesty program by the government, and then many of them exiled to the U.S. And wherever they are, those that fled the country are being still put up by the U.S. as spokesmen to the human rights violations. The very people calling for human rights violations in Nicaragua are the very ones that committed it.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that Nicaragua also has excellent relations with countries all over the world, and has been a long time supporter of the Palestinian people, and has intervened in the International Court of Justice in support of South Africa's suit against Israel for genocide, also taken Germany to the International Court for its because it, like the United States, has provided weapons to Israel to carry out that genocide. And these struggles are definitely linked. And with that in mind, I just put in the chat the brand new Veterans for Peace statement this morning, condemning the U.S. attacks on Iran that took place last night, and calling for people to go into the streets and join local and national protests. So you'll find that in the chat. Thank you.
Okay. There's like an old saying, a revolution is not a dinner party. It doesn't go by Robert's Rules of Order. And I think Nicaragua realized that once again in 2018 with the color revolution. And I think that the level of ability for Nicaragua to defend itself and to defend the revolution has risen quite a bit since 2018. And I'm very optimistic that what happened then in 2018 would be a historic event and would not happen in today's Nicaragua.
Yeah, I would just like to say thank you all for all your comments and for making this available. So my wife and I fly an Earth flag in front of our house, and to me, that becomes the model of thinking globally. You know, we're all in this world together. And I go back to the original instructions that the Lakota offer, which is take care of all your relations, live in harmony with all your relations, which is not just the two-legged, but it's every relation, and take care of grandmother Pachamama. So that would be it. So all Mataquiasan, all my relations.
And I guess I will close on just saying that, you know, again, in Nicaragua, it really helped me to understand a pattern, you know, a trajectory that Nicaragua is on, that it's really leading the way on, and that again is a sort of alternative path for humanity. It's a dire time that we really need that example. So thank you again to my fellow veterans and to the organizers.
Yeah, thanks so much to Barbara, Yoav, Camilo, and the Nicaragua Solidarity Network. This is for having us, and I think we're going to want to continue to be engaged with the important work of that you're all doing.
Well, we love you all. We hope you will stay engaged for sure.
Thank you.
I'll just say thank you briefly to all of you. I've been moved by your sharing of your experiences, and I know we'll all keep working for peace, both in Nicaragua, Latin America, and the Caribbean, and across the world. Right now it's Iran, but we'll just keep going. Camilo, I'll let you close it out, please.
Thank you, Barbara. In times of universal deceit, telling the truth is an act of rebellion. Thank you to all of you for being rebels. Thank you for standing in solidarity and resistance with the people of Nicaragua and the world.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Peace.